Hello, college football fans, and welcome once again to the SEC Yesterday and Today. I'm your host, Byrd LaCroix, and this is episode number 24 of our podcast series. We're glad you're here with us. We were hoping to have a guest on this week, but they fell through. Someone to talk about the Auburn and Georgia contest between the hedges this week, but that's okay. I'll talk about that a little bit and make some predictions. We'll look back at last week, and we might even look ahead to some bowl game possibilities. Of course, that's just speculation, but we'll see what's going on in that realm on the program today. Let's start off with last week. We, as we mentioned, had two de facto playoff games, Georgia, Kentucky, and LSU, Alabama. They turned out like we thought they would, but both by greater margins than we had thought. Of course, Alabama destroyed LSU. That makes two trips in a row to Baton Rouge for the University of Alabama when the home team has not scored a point. 2 years ago, LSU was defeated by Alabama 10-0 in a much better football game. I think most of us across the college football world, except for the University of Alabama fans, were looking for and probably expecting a close game this week. Last week, down in Baton Rouge, it didn't happen. Alabama won 29-0 and thereby clinched the SEC West. Georgia clinched the SEC East with an equally impressive victory over the University of Kentucky in the Bedlam of Lexington, Kentucky, and the Bluegrass. So Georgia and Alabama are set to play in the SEC Championship game in Atlanta on December 1st, regardless of what happens the rest of the year. Now, let's move on to this week. We're going to get right to it. We're going to do some predictions. We've got some really good games coming up. Next week is one of those weeks between the big rivalry week and this particular weekend in college football. You've got teams playing some Division II teams and there's some cupcake games. We'll still have a program and we'll still make some predictions and have some fun. But then, of course, in 2 weeks, we've got rivalry week. That's going to be very exciting. But hey, let's get right down to it and look a bit at the games that are coming up this week in the Southeastern Conference. We do have some big ones. We hope we have some exciting games. I know some of them will be exciting. We'll start with Alabama and Mississippi State. Let's get right down to it. The University of Alabama, SEC Western champions. I have mentioned them being a juggernaut. They are steamrolling people. I don't see anything else happening. Alabama, I don't care what happens, who wins where, what, or however. I don't care what happens. I care what happens in the SEC championship game, but I cannot see anybody beating the University of Alabama in any way, shape, form, or fashions. As a matter of fact, it's going to be hard for anybody to cover against the University of Alabama, the Crimson Tide. We'll find out. With 3 more weeks of the regular season, then the SEC championship game and other championship games, then we'll get right into bowl season and the playoffs. Okay, Alabama hosting Mississippi State in the CBS feature game. I don't know how much of a feature it'll be. It, of course, will be at 3:30, 2:30 Central Time over in Tuscaloosa. Alabama is a 24-point favorite. There's no need to belabor the point. I have seen some people pick Mississippi State to cover. I don't think so. I think Alabama wins. They win big again. They cover. Don't lose money and pick against the University of Alabama. There are some things I would tell you to do. Don't drink and drive being one of them. But and also don't bet against Alabama. They haven't covered every time this year, but as they are marching toward the championship playoff game this year, I think they'll cover. I think they'll win. And that's exciting to them. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations to Alabama and congratulations to Georgia, and I wish you the best. But for the rest of us in college football, it's not a lot of fun. Coach Tommy Tuberville was quoted in speaking to that subject on the Feinbaum show this week, and he said, it's boring. As a matter of fact, one of my friends that's an Alabama fan, more than one of them has mentioned to me that it's boring too for them. If it were me, it wouldn't be boring. I'd be excited, and I think most of the Tide Nation is, and I expect Alabama to march unscathed straight through the championship game. And I'm talking about the college football playoff game unscathed. Don't see it. Okay, then you have the other SEC Division champion, the University of Georgia, hosting my Auburn Tigers over in Athens between the hedges. Maybe I should go back to this game. I haven't attended a game between the hedges since 2001. The first game I attended, Auburn versus Georgia in Athens between the hedges, was 1981. This was the year Herschel Walker was a sophomore. The University of Georgia had just won the national championship in the Sugar Bowl over Notre Dame in the previous season. Many thought Herschel should have won the Heisman Trophy his freshman year. I thought that, but George Rogers for South Carolina did have a great season in 1980, but Georgia defeating Notre Dame for the national championship, and that's the last time that they were able to notch a natty in their belt. They were hoping to last year. They're certainly hoping to this year. And again, I do not see that happening. And unfortunately for us Auburn fans, I don't see Auburn winning, and I don't see them covering. Georgia is a 14.5 favorite. I was excited about the Auburn win. I was there, and it was not a fun game for the most part. Auburn really struggled again in that offensive line. I thought they might get on the perimeter a little bit, but the first two plays, the coaches had the same idea. They ran Anthony Schwartz twice for a total loss of about 14 yards, total losses of about 14 yards on those first two plays, and they pretty much abandoned that play for the rest of the ball game. I thought they could have run Shivers and Schwartz a little more, throw a little more to Seth Williams, the SEC offensive freshman player of the week. Seth Williams, a freak athlete for Auburn, and that's an exciting thing for the Tigers in the future. And he did make a great catch there at the end. But the game didn't get really exciting between Auburn and Texas A&M until the last few minutes, when Auburn scored 2 times to come back from a 10-point deficit and defeat Texas A&M by a score of 28-24. Jarrett Stidham was 7 for 8 on those last 2 drives, and he was lights out. But you can rest assured, if he does not get protected, I do hope the coaches have the wherewithal to try to put Auburn in the best position to win this week and let Stidham throw the ball, mix it up with the run, get on the perimeter, maybe run a little bit with Shivers, Whitlow, and others. I think Cam Martin is hurt, but they're going to have to protect Stidham. If you have to, God help us, run the 2-minute drill again. And do your best to keep up with those Georgia Bulldogs, who are getting better and better after that 20-point loss down in Baton Rouge. But Georgia's running strong, and I do expect them to win. And as far as covering, I wouldn't bet on it. It's 14.5 points. That's a tough one. I expect Georgia to win by 14 to 17 points. So as far as covering, you're on your own. But Georgia to win over the Auburn Tigers at 7 p.m. in Athens, Georgia on ESPN. By the way, I did mention that Alabama game at 3:30 on CBS, I think. We move on down to another one of the teams that looks like they're going to be in a New Year's Day bowl. Well, certainly a New Year's Day bowl, but probably a New Year's Day 6 bowl. The LSU Bengal Tigers. LSU trounced at home against Alabama, much to the disappointment of Tiger fans across the nation. LSU is a 14-point favorite at Fayetteville in Arkansas, 7:30 at night. I do expect LSU to win and to cover in that game against Arkansas. Arkansas has improved as the season has gone along, but you're dealing with a wounded Tiger and LSU, and I think Coach O and his team comes back and puts a pretty good whipping on Arkansas. I think they win and they cover the 14 points up in Fayetteville. Now we get down to Kentucky, another cat licking its wounds. Kentucky, a 6.5-point favorite over the University of Tennessee Volunteers in Knoxville, Tennessee, Neyland Stadium, 3:30 on Saturday afternoon. This could be a good ball game. Tennessee gave South Carolina everything they could handle and more. The Gamecocks were able to pull out the game over Tennessee last weekend, and I expect the same thing from the Kentucky Wildcats in Lexington. I think the Volunteers will put up a good fight again, mostly for a half, but the Cats do have horses. The Georgia Bulldogs were able to subdue them and defeat them. I thought this would happen. Georgia had been there before. They have played in games like that. Kentucky, I think, was happy to be there. I know they were fired up. I really thought they had a chance to win, but the more talented and well-prepared Bulldogs beat them. But I expect Kentucky to win and to cover against Tennessee in Knoxville. We move on down to the Florida Gators, a team that is also coming off of a very tough defeat to the University of Missouri, a sound defeat at the hand of the Missouri Tigers. And those Tigers are on a roll, and they're certainly going to be in a position to play in a bowl game. We'll see what happens versus the Gators and South Carolina. South Carolina, I mentioned, pulling out a tough one against Tennessee. And this should be a very good football game. And the game's going to be in Gainesville again. The Gators are 6-point favorite over South Carolina. That's a tough one to pick. I think the Gators will win at home. I do think they'll rebound and beat the South Carolina Gamecocks as far as covering. I'm going to say it's going to be closer than that and South Carolina to cover. The Gators could certainly win by 7 points and cover that 6, but I think the Gators will regroup, be able to win, but not cover the 6-point spread against the South Carolina Gamecocks. Okay. We go to Columbia, Missouri, where you find a noon game with the Missouri Tigers hosting the Vanderbilt Commodores. This is one that I find very interesting. Missouri is a 17-point favorite. Vanderbilt had the week off. They've had a chance to regroup. Missouri, again, defeating Florida in the swamp. But I expect it to be a good ball game. I mean, Vanderbilt has played teams close. They played Kentucky off their feet. They played Notre Dame off their feet. They've played tough under Coach Derek Mason. They played some tough defense, and I expect them to do the same this week. I certainly have Missouri winning at home. It's not a lock, but I think they'll beat the Commodores. I certainly do not think that they'll cover the 17-point spread. And the last game of the week, a noon game. Another noon game, Texas A&M versus the Ole Miss Rebels. Texas A&M, the Aggies hosting Ole Miss in that noon game. And how's this one going to go? A&M 11.5-point favorite. Ole Miss, a team, as we know, that has an offense, a very good offense under Ta'amu. And they'll put up some points, but I expect A&M to put up more, a lot more. A&M coming off that tough, heartbreaking loss down on the Plains. I do expect them to rebound and cover against Ole Miss. The 11.5-point spread, Texas A&M to defeat the Rebel Land Shark Black Bears in College Station. And that brings us to our final little portion of the program this week. Bowl games, upcoming bowl games. It is a little early. There are 3 weeks left in the regular season and then the championship games. So we can only speculate, not necessarily wildly, but speculate is all we can do at this point as far as bowl games. And I'm going to refer to Stuart Mandel of the New Athletic website and sports program. Here's what he has for the New Year's 6 bowl games in the Southeastern Conference. He has 3 SEC teams in New Year's 6 bowl games. Here's what he has as far as those games that he expects what will happen. In the Sugar Bowl, he's got Georgia. You know who he's got in the Cotton Bowl in one of the playoff games. That's the University of Alabama. And I don't expect that to happen, barring some act of God or miracle. It's going to be Alabama versus whomever in Arlington in Jerry World in the first round of the college football playoffs. Mandel is speculating that Alabama will play Michigan, the Wolverines, but the Wolverines still have a tough schedule. Of course, they've got to play Ohio State and others before the season is over with. I don't know about that, but I do expect Alabama to be there. As far as playoff games, Mandel has the Orange Bowl, the other playoff game with Clemson versus Notre Dame. I understand that. Don't know if that will happen. Notre Dame still has a couple of tough contests to play, and one of them being against Southern Cal, but it's looking more and more like the Fighting Irish could very well wind up in the college football playoff. We don't know for sure. Now, here's another SEC team. We mentioned New Year's 6 bowl games. He has Kentucky playing in the Peach Bowl versus West Virginia. That could very well happen, and I'd be tickled to death to see the Kentucky Wildcats in a New Year's Six Bowl here in Atlanta, Georgia, as an at-large team. We'll see if that happens. I certainly hope it does. And the Rose Bowl, he has Ohio State versus Washington State. Wazoo, a nice surprise under Coach Mike Leach. And there's nothing more fun than a Mike Leach press conference. If you've never watched one of those, do so. He's a lot of fun. He's one of those coaches, and I love Gus, but Gus is as dry as a bone as far as press conferences go. And Mike Leach, one of the favorites, along with Steve Spurrier, people like that, Les Miles, they were great at press conferences. We could use some more of that in college football instead of playing it so close to the vest, so straight-laced. But whatever your personality is, that's all right. It's college football. And in an at-large game, another SEC team in a New Year's Six Bowl, LSU versus the University of Central Florida in the Fiesta Bowl at Glendale, Arizona. Once again, this is Stuart Mandel of The Athletic. I'm not going to differ with him. I don't know. I don't know if that many SEC teams will play in New Year's Day bowl games. Again, there's a few more football games to be played. As far as LSU, after they play Arkansas and Fayetteville this week, they've got Rice and Baton Rouge and Texas A&M in College Station. Texas A&M is not a given for LSU in College Station, so I don't want to step out and say LSU plays in a New Year's Six Bowl, but they very well could. I wouldn't be surprised. So that's it as far as speculation is concerned. Bowl games are concerned. You're going to have some teams in the bowl games, SEC teams like the Tax Slayer Bowl in Jacksonville, the Belk Bowl in Charlotte, and the Music City Bowl in Nashville, the Liberty Bowl, and others. The Birmingham Bowl, we don't want to forget that one. Auburn is about to play their way out of the Birmingham Bowl or the Liberty Bowl, I do suppose. I absolutely expect them to beat the Liberty Flames next year. And as far as speculating on what other teams will play in bowls, I'll only speak to my Auburn Tigers. I expect them to lose this week, to lose to Alabama, of course, but to beat Liberty, to go 7-5 and play either in the Music City Bowl, the Tax Slayer Bowl, or the Belk Bowl. I think most people are projecting the Belk Bowl, possibly the Tax Slayer, which is on New Year's Eve. Personally, I'd like to see them in the Music City Bowl. You could run up to Nashville, have a big time downtown Nashville, and walk across the bridge to the stadium there to watch Auburn play whomever it might be. But we don't know. But that's the projection, and I think it will be one of those three bowls for the Tigers. As we get closer to bowl time and the season winds down and completes itself, we'll speak more to that. But today, we're going to wrap it up for the SEC yesterday and today, episode 24. Once again, I am your host, Bird LaCroix, and I thank you for listening to us. We'd like to say once again where you can find us. That would be me. You can find me on Twitter at Autull, Autull. My email address is birdlacroix@yahoo.com. And you can find my participation in a college football roundtable column on sportshacks.com. And you can find the SEC Yesterday and Today podcast on sportshacks.com. So ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and children of all ages, be sure to stay safe out there, enjoy the games, and be sure to love your neighbor.